Hi, everybody. Welcome to another lockdown live stream, although we're not quite as locked down as we were before, except perhaps in Glasgow. We have Andy Saunders here tonight, who is a horn player, professional horn player, and he's worked in various European countries and as well as here in Scotland. And we're going to be looking at the impact of Brexit on the life of a freelancer in the cultural sector, which is what he is. Just date stamp the meeting tonight, the chat tonight. It's the 17th of May 2021, which is one of the significant dates in the roadmap that is not really a roadmap. Anyway, let's talk about music. So Andy, it's really nice to see you. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part and coming and having a chat with us tonight. I wondered if you could give us a kind of brief potted history of how you got your career together and how you became a professional musician. And I mean, you can go right back to, we were talking about recorders a minute ago, you can go right back to recorders or xylophones or whatever, but your instrument, the French horn, that's your specialist instrument, has a European flavour just in its name. And so is music inherently international? So there's a sort of philosophical starter. So a bit potted history and a bit of philosophy.
Okay. Yeah, well, I started playing the horn at school when I was probably 13 or 14. It was an excuse to miss science lessons because my best friend played the trumpet. He got to miss science once a week. So I could share a lesson with him. And then I studied music at York University. And then I came up to Glasgow to do a postgrad. So I'm from Dundee originally. So it was nice to come back north. So I did a postgrad, a master's at the RSAMD, as was. And then pretty much straight away after that, I went to do an audition in Slovenia for the opera and ballet orchestra there in Ljubljana, and I won the job, is the phrase that they use. I won the solo horn job there. So I was first touring the orchestra there for a season, and then I resigned and came back. So I've been freelancing ever since. So I do lots of work with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra and the BBC Scottish, the opera and the RSNO, anyone who pays me. I don't really, well, I kind of mind, but not too much. But I suppose because I'm a freelancer as well, I've always been involved in putting on different projects as well. So I ran a festival for a while. I'm currently co-chair of New Music Scotland, which is the network which supports and facilitates contemporary classical music, I suppose is the nearest phrase to it. There's always a problem with vocabulary when you talk about new music and contemporary music. I suppose it's the more avant-garde experimental side of things. And I do some teaching at Glasgow University as well. I'm officially the performance consultant, so the affiliate staff for the music department. So I suppose recently, it's part of the life of a freelancer. I suppose you get involved in different projects, you meet different people, and then you go and work with different ensembles. The scene in Scotland is very small. Everyone knows each other. The scene in the UK is pretty small. So you end up playing with the familiar faces, the same people. But I was very lucky that last year I ended up doing some work in Belgium and then in Germany. So in fact, during the lockdown, the first bit of the lockdown, particularly, I was in Frankfurt and ended up doing some work with Ensemble Modern and the opera at Kaiserslautern and a couple of chamber orchestras as well. So it was, it's very lucky. But it's interesting. I thought about, is music inherently international? And I mean, yes. doesn't really need any elaboration.
No, it doesn't.
Of course it is. It's a language that is international, and someone who plays in a Western style with Western tuning, Western temperament, can easily communicate with someone who plays in a completely different temperament, tuning system, style. You can respond to each other, you can hear what someone's doing, you can take inspiration, you can exchange ideas without ever exchanging a word. So yes, it is inherently international. And musical communities, musicians, creators, composers particularly, what's the right, I suppose I was going to say borrow, it's probably not quite right, is it? They take inspiration from colleagues from other countries. They hear what's happening somewhere else, they take ideas, take inspiration, and in turn they inspire ideas and inspiration. And there's a constant cultural exchange going on. Every time that you have a conductor from a different country, a soloist from a different country, there's an exchange of ideas that happens.
And that's such an awful thing that we're going to lose. And that's the kind of quantifiable aspect of that is impossible to quantify, really, isn't it? Because, you know, how can you put a price on the loss of that? Because it's, I mean, things I guess will still happen, but it's going to just be much more difficult and much more expensive, isn't it, for people to go and work abroad? I think you've had some, you've got some knowledge about the difficulties that might face you if you were to try and get a job, or if you were even if you were offered a job abroad.
There's I mean, there's been a lot in the news recently about sort of the lack of agreement between the UK government and the EU as part of the Brexit agreement over musicians travelling and working within the EU. I suppose there are sort of three different elements to it. So one element is groups touring. So particularly bands, the sort of, kind of singer-songwriter things, bands, I suppose maybe more the trad side of things and the jazz side of things, where it's an ensemble is formed, a band is formed, and they are an entity, whether they're an unincorporated organization or a limited company or a charity. They are an entity, and often they're working with an agent, and that agent has a company. So in a way, that's a slightly different thing. That's a different set of problems. So at that point, that organization or that band, they're providing a service which is being bought in. So that's one way of doing it. That then brings problems to do with equipment. The carnets have been discussed quite a lot. And there are limitations on how many countries a van can travel through. So if I think I'm right in saying this. I think if a band wanted to tour in, say, in Central Europe, if they wanted to do a tour that was going to Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, through Germany and back, I don't think they would be able to do it in the same van, because the van is limited, I think, to 3 countries that it can travel through.
Maybe even 2.
So that maybe, I'm not entirely sure, but it's not enough. It's not enough countries to do that tour. So suddenly that means that even a trio is struggling to do that trip. Particularly if they're a trio that is taking with them electronic equipment, if they're taking speakers or PA with them rather than hiring it locally. So, and then of course the carnet has to list absolutely everything that's in the van, and that carnet has to be passed at every border, at every checkpoint, has to be looked at. So it's massively time consuming. The admin involved is huge. It means that you need to allow more time for travel whilst you're on the road, and it is just a sort of set of unnecessary barriers, really. If you're a freelance musician like I am, I go and guest with different orchestras. So pre-Brexit, I was able to go. There's an orchestra in Belgium who called and asked, "We need someone to come and play third horn next week." It was the last gig I did before lockdown, was Beethoven 9 in Belgium. So it was Ode to Joy. So it was quite powerful in many ways. But they were able to phone me and say, "Can you come?" Yes, I can. No problem. Absolutely fine. So I could book my flights. There it was. Fine. That's no longer possible. Because they would need to agree a work permit for me. They would need to justify the work permit for me. Justify why they were bringing someone from outside the EU when there are plenty of horn players, sadly, within the EU. It's a slight grey area. I think an agreement has now been reached, but theoretically, I would be importing my instrument to go to that country to play and then exporting it back again, which could, if you get the wrong customs official, could end up being a huge discussion. I mean, my horn was made in, I think, 1962. I have a receipt from where I bought it, when I bought it. Whether or not that receipt is in my Dropbox that I have with me, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't have. I have no idea where the receipt would be for the mutes I've got, mouthpiece, the tuner, all that kind of thing. But in theory, all of that could become a problem. And I suppose the other aspect of things is going to be for composers, particularly composers, where a composer, a Scottish composer who lives in Glasgow, if they're commissioned by a German organisation, then they don't necessarily need to physically travel to Germany to do it. They can do it from Glasgow. But are they working in Germany if they're being paid in Germany, or are they working here? I don't know the answer to that. Probably working, I mean, philosophically, they're working in both, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I don't know what the answer to that would be in legal terms. So I don't know how problematic that could be. And I suspect that people will just make their own decisions and make fine, this is where you're being paid. But I don't know whether that's open to charges or tariffs. I don't know what the situation is with that.
I'll have to quiz my nephew, because he's a composer of contemporary classical music, strangely enough. So I actually know what you're talking about. Right, I believe we've got a question or two from social media, so I'm going to invite Inga in to ask the questions of you, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hey there. So we have 2 questions from Bill Roger via Facebook. First question is, in a normal year, not 2020, of course, what proportion of your income is derived from European gigs? So wanting to know what's personally at risk in material terms for you?
It's completely random. It every year for me is totally different. So it would depend on, I mean, it's an impossible question to answer, to be honest. It can be anything from 5% up to probably 40%, just depending on, or the year I was working in Slovenia, 100%. Although that was pre-EU, Slovenia was pre-EU. Yeah.
And then second question, also from Bill Roger. We've heard that the musicians' bodies have been lobbying for improvements to the TCA. Any signs of movement from either the UK or the EU?
I think that there have been a few developments. I think there has been some sort of agreement about instruments moving to other countries. There seemed to be some sort of thing about if you can carry the instrument yourself, then it's fine. But I don't know whether that's been completely confirmed that that's actually happening. I think my feeling is that because of COVID, I think that there are a lot of things which haven't yet really surfaced as issues. I think it's also probably noticeable that people do tend to travel. I mean, lots of people will travel. Musicians, they do tend to travel with budget airlines a lot of the time, just because their schedules are often better. And most of them haven't been flying. It's been the main flag carriers who tend to have more space anyway. So they tend to be a little bit more generous with musicians anyhow. So I don't know whether that has sort of hidden some of the issues. But I think there has been a little bit of movement. But again, I guess most of the discussion has been about the big organisations. They're the ones with the most power and the biggest voices as well, even within these unions. So it's been to do with orchestral touring, to do with bands touring. It hasn't really been to do with individuals working elsewhere. And the ones, I think the people who will really be hit the hardest, to be honest, are going to be people who work in early music, in historical performance, because there's a huge amount of that takes place in France, Belgium, Holland, particularly, Switzerland, Austria, Switzerland. Okay, they're not EU, but a lot of the players who are specialists in that will spend 50%, if not more, of their time working in orchestras as guest players. So in their own right, not as not as an ensemble from the UK touring, but as guest players sitting in an orchestra in Paris. So I think they'll find it difficult.
So it's going to be a harder slog for an individual than for somebody who's a member of a band or an orchestra or whatever. Doesn't sound very very hopeful or very promising. I'll just go back to Slovenia briefly. That was kind of your first professional job, you said, and you won the job. I love that description. You won the job there. How long were you there, and what was it like, being there for your first job, and and how was the country, and how was the experience? Had you traveled much in Europe before, or was that kind of your first experience of living in Europe?
Yeah, I'd done quite a lot of traveling. I mean, that was kind of why I thought a job in Slovenia would be interesting. Otherwise, that might have been a little bit mad. It was quite mad, as it was, really, thinking about it. Yeah, it was interesting. It was 2001 when I got the job. So the audition situation, the audition sort of style there is different. So in the UK, you would do an audition, and from audition, anything between sort of 5 to 30 players will be offered a trial, and that trial will be a week's work, which then that's whittled down to 15 people who do another week's work, and so on, and it can go on for a long time. So I've been on trial for jobs for 2.5 years, and then not got them. By which time I was quite relieved. Whereas on the continent, you do the job, the audition all takes place in one day. So at the end of the day, someone wins the job.
Okay.
Which is
hence the expression.
Has its merits as well as slightly different things. So yeah, I mean, at that point in time, it was a lot of paperwork to get the job, or to be allowed to go and start the job. Yeah, I think it's all sort of very vague. It's sort of 20 years ago now.
Yes.
But yeah, I do remember a whole day of sitting in an office and just basically sitting in a queue to wait. And then, so I finally got to my turn. So he stamped my card and said, "Okay, now you need to go next door." And so by which time it was kind of closing. So I came back the next day, went next door. All he needed to do was see one document, so he then verified I had that and then sent me back to the previous guy. So, and part of that, of course, was that, it was pre-computers for a lot of things. And there was a lot of sort of red tape involved coming out of a communist setup as well and everything. So, and Slovenia hadn't been independent for all that long, I suppose, as well. So, yeah, so there were different things going on. But yeah, it had its moments. had its moments. But I resigned at the end of the season and came back.
Okay. Oh well, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear about those experiences. The bureaucracy reminds me of a day I once spent in Athens with my sister, running around. I mean, it really was like you described. We were literally running around from one office to another, trying to sort out some paperwork. It's all to do with my mum's will, and it was oh god, it drove us bonkers. And I was supposed to be flying home that day as well. Anyway, yes, bureaucracy. Don't we love it? And aren't we going to have to get used to it? So let's go back to where you are now, and sitting in Glasgow, working in the museum. Where did I get that from? The university, in the music department. Are you still getting EU students coming across? I mean, I guess probably now they still are, but do you anticipate we'll still get EU students coming across? And what other sort of countries do they come from? And while you're on that subject, have any of your students benefited from Erasmus or Erasmus Plus?
Yeah, we've had a lot of students who do Erasmus. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
you can.
Yeah. In terms of admissions, because I'm affiliate staff, thankfully I don't have to wade through hundreds of interviews and auditions. So, yeah, so to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that.
Okay.
We have a few this year, and we have a few who've just finished their first year. Yeah, so hopefully the situation, because philosophically, I think Scotland is still reaching out to the EU. I think there's more of a connection there. So I think that there's probably a feeling of welcome here a wee bit more than there is elsewhere. So hopefully it'll continue, because it's really important. It's really important for our students here to work alongside people and have friends who are from other countries as well.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yes, lifelong friendships going forward and holidays in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's always the thing. And also, you know, it's just that networking thing that you do, isn't it? And then people hear about something and think, oh, I know somebody who does that, and can contact them. But yes, all these things are going to be a bit more tricky. I'm going to just move on a wee bit, staying in music education. Have you kind of spotted any trends in where your students move on to in terms of work? I think because we did talk briefly before, and you said that there won't be enough orchestras in the UK that will have slots for all the graduates to fill. So I mean, obviously prior to Brexit, presumably at least some of them went to European countries, EU countries, to seek work, and presumably that is going to be, if not impossible, but certainly a lot more difficult for them in future. So, I mean, how do you see that panning out going forward?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, obviously there are lots of ways to make your living as a musician. You don't have to just go into an orchestra.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, for classical musicians, the orchestras are, the traditional route, and they're an established route. They're an established institution set up to employ people. Great. They're in the UK. How many people have we got in the UK? 70 million?
65 million.
65, 70 million. I think in terms of contract orchestras, I think we'd be full-time salaried contract orchestras. I think we'd be around the 20 mark. I mean, most of the London orchestras aren't salaried, and they operate on a freelance basis, but they have contracts and they have a certain amount that they're going to earn. So those sort of contract orchestras, we've got sort of around the 20 mark, I think. Germany, as an example, Germany has 125 million people, and they have something like 148 comparable orchestras. So there are more orchestras there. And I suppose for lots of people here, they would either do an exchange year, particularly if they're studying at music college, well, university and music college. But if they're looking at the orchestral route, if they're studying at music college, people would often do an exchange year within the EU, or might go and do a master's within the EU. And then, of course, working there is much easier. As it was pre-Brexit, you could apply for any job in the EU, of course. And you wouldn't necessarily get an audition, because there are different styles of playing and different schools of playing. So if you obviously were going to sound way different to the rest of the section, then there was no point. Fine. But you were entitled to apply. Now, though, that obviously isn't possible. So jobs are being, there was a job I saw advertised the other day that I thought, ooh, that could be really good fun, but I can't apply for it. Because I don't have a work permit. I don't have the right to live and work in the south of France. So sadly, that means I can't apply for it.
And just on music education as well, but thinking kind of earlier in students' careers, do you have any kind of insight into what's happening in school-based education and one-to-one tuition and that sort of thing for students, or is that sort of outside of your scope of knowledge?
No, I think it's there were commitments made by all of the parties in Scotland at the election or pre-election to basically improve the music education. I'm not sure I'm quite right there. I think the Conservative Party said that they would keep it as it was. But all the other parties made commitments to put more funding into it and to expand it. So there's definitely it's going in the right direction slowly. I think obviously I'm biased, but I mean, it seems very odd to me that there seems to be this sudden swing towards focusing on the sciences so much at the expense of everything.
Yeah.
And it's all very short term because it'll swing back the other way. And it just means that you're going to be left with pockets across generations who have no real experience or knowledge of something or what that can unlock. And it's no bad thing for someone who is creative and artistic to have an understanding of, actually how does the world work, to understand the sciences and to study them. But the flip side is also true. It's no bad thing for a scientist to understand what value the arts bring, and that there is value beyond hard data that you can see written down. So I think it is improving. I mean, again, if you look at most of the EU countries, their education systems prioritize the arts more than the UK's does. So, again, that I suppose that kind of inspiration and conversation is something that we'll be losing.
Back to my nephew in Greece. When he was in Greece at school, he was at a specialist music school. That was his high school. His high school was a specialist music school. And that's just in a small town in Greece. We have nothing like that. We have. I came from kind of the home counties, and there was something called the Arts Educational School, which was close by us, but it was a private school. It wasn't a council run school.
Yeah, I mean there are a handful.
Typically been very bad.
Yeah, I mean there are a handful of specialist music schools in Scotland, but they're few and far between.
Yeah. Yes, we all need to be more rounded. We need to be more appreciative of everything. I think we have another question from Inga, and if you want to bring that one up.
Yes, sure. It's actually a triple question. So, how are Scottish music students feeling about being deprived of Erasmus Plus? Are they doing anything about it? And how much does it look like touring will compensate?
Very good question.
I don't know. I suppose is the short answer. I don't know. I haven't been involved in any discussions with undergrad students yet, or about what their plans are for Erasmus. I think there have been discussions going on, haven't there? I think to try and make something possible, but I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. And so, what was the third bit of the question?
It was whether the touring program would compensate for the loss of Erasmus Plus.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I mean, I hope it will, but I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Is there another one as well, Inga?
Yes, we do have another question that's just coming from Craig Michael Potter, who's asking, do you think by next year we will be in a better place regarding musicians touring in Europe?
I really hope so.
These are kind of unanswerable questions, aren't they, really?
They're quite tricky.
I think we probably will be, but I don't know that it'll be an equal playing field. I think that probably what will happen is that the big organisations who also have direct voices, direct conversation to government, I suspect that the big organisations will be the ones who lead on that, which is fine. That makes sense. But I do think that it means that the kind of smaller independent organisations who are kind of more flexible, they can be quicker to respond. They, in many ways, can be more creative because artistically there's less risk in a small organisation doing something that's a bit experimental or a bit mad than there is with a large national company doing it. I think that it will be better, but I think it'll be quite a hard slog until it gets to the point where there's a genuine possibility of exchanging cultural ideas and experiences.
Yeah, well, while you're answering that, I was thinking about the fact that we've concentrated very much on the issues about UK musicians trying to get to the EU to tour, but presumably there's going to be a certain degree of problematical problems that are going to arise from people coming in the opposite direction. So, I mean, I remember it's been for quite a while. Is it the WOMAD festival that's had difficulty getting work permits for some of the musicians to come across, who were obviously not European, but they were denied permits to come in. So and given recent events in Glasgow, there's this whole kind of thing with the Home Office and work permits, and that's going to start applying to European musicians as well. It's going to make it we're going to be very inward looking in terms of what people are going to actually be able to go and see and who they're going to be able to go and see.
Yeah, that's certainly been the case for, I know that Counterflows, which is a Glasgow-based festival. I mean, Counterflows is sort of, I'm not sure how Alistair Campbell's the curator for it. He would sort of, I don't know, he doesn't like describing what it is, which I think is brilliant. But it's a complete mix of sort of kind of world music, meeting experimental music, meeting commercial music, meeting something else, meeting spoken word, meeting something else, it's a complete mix. But for a number of years, he has found that at the last minute, artists have had visas turned down. I think on at least one occasion, someone had a visa but was still turned away. So yeah, that could end up happening. I mean, from the point of view of European or EU musicians touring to the UK, yes, it will definitely impact them. The problem that we're going to have is that they don't necessarily need to tour to the UK. I mean, the EU is a way bigger market. There are more festivals in the EU. There are more concerts going on. There are more venues.
Yeah, they're just bypasses. Yeah.
There's more happening. So one of the flip sides, I mean, it's going to be way more expensive for a festival here to bring over a group from somewhere. So it means that fewer groups will come over. It probably means that the same group will come over and do several festivals. So it means that we'll have a less diverse offering here. We'll have, it'd be the same people we listen to, which I'm sure will be great because I'm sure they'll be very good. But it will have a narrower choice. And yes, it might lead to more gigs than for UK-based groups. But again, there are more festivals in the EU. So yeah, it doesn't really stack up.
No. Okay. Oh, I've just had a comment come through from there's a guy called Kenneth who's just pointed out there are 4 specialist music schools in Scotland. So as an information service here, Douglas Academy, Dice, Plockton and Broughton. So there we go. Now we know how many there are. And St Mary's. Oh, that's another one.
5.
Okay, so 5 music schools in Scotland.
I'll raise you, Kenneth.
You raise Kenneth. Well, thank you so much, Andy. That's been really fascinating talking to you about all of those issues. And I think we have a lot of music lovers in our group, and in fact, anybody with a soul loves music, and so we all need to care about this because it does give us so much, and it's one of the things that for so many people has kept us going through this horrible year and a bit that we've been going through. And people are really looking forward, whatever sort of genre of music they like, to go into live gigs and concerts and festivals and all the rest of it. So we can't wait, and and maybe it'll need a revolution of the the Reading and Leeds Massive or whatever to kind of say, well, I thought so and so were coming, but one of them couldn't get through the visa route or whatever.
I mean, when you do finally get to a concert, spare a thought for the musicians on stage who won't have played to an audience for quite a long time. And it's amazing how when I did 2 concerts in Germany with an audience, and it's amazing how suddenly you kind of think, oh, there are people listening. and it's
Does
quite
it give you a
strange.
sort of stage fright in a way, or just a kind of?
I mean, there's always an element of kind of, I really hope the right note comes out. There's no reason that it shouldn't, but you never know. Yeah, it's just different, very different. I mean, it's taken a long time to adapt to playing without an audience and to performing to cameras or to a completely empty hall.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the cameras are operated remotely. There's no one behind them either. So you're performing to an empty hall. At the end of the gig, maybe one person might clap. It's all very odd. It's all very odd. So it's taken a long time to adapt to that. So coming back the other way will be really exciting. But inevitably there'll be times where you think, I want to be back in my front room. But see.
We've all got to get over it. Everybody's got to get through it and get over it, and get back to sing live music again. That's what we want, really. So anyway, but thank you so much. It's been really interesting talking to you tonight, and keep going and keep playing and keep encouraging all those lovely students of yours, and let's all try and keep our sort of open, Scottish, welcoming nature as much as we can, for as long as we can.
Yep.
And that's kind of that's my final message for tonight.
Thank you for having me.
That's all right. Thank you very much for coming along, and goodbye for now.